Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership and stories from across the global mining industry. In this episode, I'm joined by Tom Elliott, the founder of Hotspur Helium, who hold the largest multinational primary helium portfolio globally. We're going to discuss what Hotspur Helium is building and the ambition behind the company before stepping back to look at why helium has become such a compelling focus for investors and operators alike. Tom's going to share his insights into the critical uses of helium from healthcare and advanced manufacturing to space and technology and the demand trends reshaping the global supply landscape. We're also going to discuss Hotspur Helium, what they think about where to operate globally, what differentiates the company and an increasing competitive space, and where the company sits in its growth journey. Finally, we're going to dive into the commercial realities of helium projects, including takeoff interest, project economics, and payback potential, and what the outlook looks like for the company over the coming years. This is a practical forward conversation about a niche commodity that plays an outsized role in a modern industry, and how Hotspur Helium is positioning itself within this space. So, Tom, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Hi, Rob. Great to be on. Thank you.
No, appreciate your time. We met at a conference and we started speaking, and I thought, yeah, this would be a good story to tell on the podcast, and obviously education. I think we may have had one helium podcast in the 600 that we've recorded, so this is another helium story. So as we always start these podcasts off, just wondering if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career, how you got into the industry, and how your career has sort of developed and its journey through to today.
Absolutely. So I started off in renewable energy, actually, in geothermal energy, mostly focusing on projects in East Africa, in Kenya and Ethiopia, and a little bit in Indonesia as well. And I did that for about 10 years or so, and then spent a bit of time looking at all the various commodities that were available and were out there, and helium just struck me as a really exciting commodity to focus on. We've identified a couple of quite clear opportunities, certainly in terms of where we're looking around the world, which hopefully we'll come on to in a minute. And yeah, it's been a fantastic journey. I put together a brilliant team of people who I've worked with before, some people I haven't worked with before, and just we're trying to grow the company as quickly as we can, as efficiently as we can, and make lots of money for investors.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. So for those that are not familiar with Hotspur Helium, just wonder if you can just give us a snapshot of the company, and I suppose your objectives.
Sure. So we're the world's largest explorer and multinational explorer in terms of acreage. We have around 20,000 square kilometers across the Middle East and Southern Africa. The reason we've chosen these jurisdictions, these areas, is because the helium sector is increasingly regionalized. North America pretty much looks after itself. Russia's taking care of China and that side of the world. And there is an inevitable supply gap coming for Europe. Like with many things, Europe is actually a bit behind the times with developing its own supplies of things, and we've identified that there's a real opportunity there. So our focus is solely on the Middle East and Southern Africa, all places where these are sensible operating jurisdictions, places which have a history of either of mining or of energy exploration, and that we can come in and we can be the first people going into these countries and acquiring large tracts of acreage. all of which, by the way, is driven by the geology. So we have two of the world's leading helium experts, Professors John Glias at Durham University. He's also the president of the Geological Society of London, and Professor Chris Ballantyne at Oxford. And together, they're the pioneers of primary helium exploration. They discovered the Rukwa Basin in Tanzania. They've been working in Australia, in Canada, and North America, and we have taken those ideas and those concepts and applied them to new prospects, areas where people haven't looked before. And the difference between us and a lot of the other explorers out there is that we're targeting scale. The places where we're looking, that the size of the acreage there it demands these large world-class prospects. And we consider a world-class prospect something that's sort of 5 BCF of recoverable helium or more per prospect. So we're only looking for those. Someone said to me the other day, "Oh, okay, so you're elephant hunting," and that's essentially what we're doing. And we're able to do that because helium is such certainly in these countries that we're looking, a nascent commodity, and we're the first people through the door, and we're able to acquire the best acreage.
Yeah. And I suppose what actually drew you, I mean, obviously you came across helium, but what actually drew you to helium, and why does it stand out as an attractive resource today?
It's used in essentially everything. The top three uses of helium are semiconductor manufacture, MRI scanners, and space exploration. Those are the top three. And when you start thinking about it, about every single commodity or every single item, component part that uses helium, do you have a smartphone? Well, that needs helium for semiconductors. Do you have a new a washing machine? Well, that needs helium for the semiconductors. Some kettles even use helium. And then in Zambia, where we operate, we're using Starlink, the satellite internet. It's fantastic. It's really helpful for connectivity, rural connectivity. We use it in the UK as well. And well, that needs helium for the space launches and getting all of the satellites up into orbit. MRIs is another obvious one. Every MRI scanner needs a top up of helium sort of once or twice a year, and these are huge requirements for this commodity. And so we looked when we thought about which commodity we should go for. Helium was just the standout commodity that people often miss it. I mean, it's not a traded commodity. There's no spot price. So there was a real opportunity there to take advantage of something that had sort of been forgotten, but is critical for the rise of AI. It's irreplaceable in all of its key uses. You can't use anything else really for the inert atmosphere for semiconductor manufacture, and the number of semiconductors that are used in everyday objects is just going up and up and up. And then on the space side of things, I think SpaceX last year launched 170 rockets. It was basically one every other day. I remember my father telling me a story where he traveled to America to watch the space launch that was going on that month. But now they're just so commonplace. And every single space launch uses something like 6% of the daily helium consumption. So the amount that's being used is just going up and up and up. And that's what we're taking advantage of, and that's what we're looking at. And crucially, we're a long-term company. These things take, a few years to get off the ground. We appreciate that. And we're going to be there. We're going to have large supplies available as the AI boom comes through, as the semiconductor boom comes through, as the space boom comes through. And that's our objective, essentially.
You're working obviously across several regions globally. How do you think about choosing where to operate, and how is the helium supply landscape evolving over time? And again, I suppose looking at the supply and demand, are we actually using up a lot of surplus at the moment, or is there enough for a period of time?
Yeah. Okay. Let me start on how we choose where we're working. So we're resource driven. That's the primary element there. So we're only going to go somewhere where the resource is excellent. And helium, there are a few sort of telltale signs that you look for in the geological history. You need about 1 billion years worth of good stable geology. So that really does limit where you're able to look. But you also need a relatively recent heating event. So within the last 1 million years or so. So there's a bit of variation in there in terms of what you're looking for, and that really does narrow down the areas where you can target. Fortunately, as I said, we've got two of the world's leading experts in helium exploration in our team. And over COVID, they put together essentially an atlas for the global helium, and they understand exactly where the best places are around the world to look. What other team members are able to bring to the table is the regulatory assessment and making sure that we're operating in sensible jurisdictions, stable regulatory environments, frameworks. The 3 countries where we're operating at the moment, 2 in Southern Africa, that's Botswana and Zambia, both have a long history of mining. Zambia, the copper belt and other commodities, of course, as well, and the Botswana diamonds. So there's a really well understood and frankly quite sensible legislative framework in place in both of those countries there. And then in the Middle East, we're operating in Jordan. Jordan also has a long history of exploration, primarily for oil and gas, and also for other commodities as well. So we're able to fit into those mining and oil and gas regulations very easily. The final thing that we focus on there really is the representation that we can get in each of these countries. It's all well and good having a fantastic legislative framework, but if you're not able to actually make use of that, and it's all just in paper and it's not actually in practice, you need to make sure that you've got those connections on the ground. You've got the ability to operate on the ground, and that's something that we bring as well. So I mean, over the last, the company was founded in 2024. Over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've achieved a huge amount. We've gone from essentially having just an idea to now holding 20,000 square kilometers of acreage across these 3 different jurisdictions, all of which we're extremely excited about in terms of the geology. So I hope that answers the first part of the question. Could you remind me, Rob, what was the second bit?
Yeah, it was just, I suppose, the whole landscape in terms of supply and demand of helium. Is there surplus, and is the helium being used up? So you, apart from trying to produce helium for current needs, are you filling up the surplus supply that is depleting? Because I think we spoke about this before when we agreed to do the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And 95% of global helium is a byproduct of the oil and gas industry at the moment, which means it's essentially intrinsically linked to that sector, to that commodity. I saw a great presentation at a conference the other day where they said, "Oh, well, is helium at the moment is helium the tail on the dog, or is it the flea on the end of the tail of the dog?" And right now, given the size of the LNG industry, it's pretty small. Qatar produces 35% of the world's helium. But that's from 0.04% concentration of helium in their field. So it's there's a huge opportunity there to identify primary helium prospects that are totally disassociated from oil and gas, which is exactly what we're doing. So you're not at the whim of the oil and gas market, which is critical for things like semiconductor manufacture or MRI scanners. If suddenly the LNG price halves, then that can become a real issue for things like MRIs. So that's what we're doing in terms of providing a stable supply source that is completely disassociated from petroleum products, moving it more into the mindful of your listeners, moving it more into the mining side of things, which has been actually quite interesting in terms of the countries that we've been working in. Does it fit under oil and gas legislation? Does it fit under mining legislation? And each country has a different way of looking at it. But in terms of supply, what we're seeing at the moment is there's a period of stability. There's a period where there's supply and demand are just about matched, but this is preempting very, very soon. There will be this huge surge of demand from things like semiconductors, from the rise of AI, from the space industry, and you can see countries, particularly the US is a great example. They're starting to stockpile. They're starting to build up their helium reserves. I know Mesa, for example, have just got a deal with Qatar buying helium specifically for them, ostensibly for the European market. But Mesa also own the US Federal Reserve, which is being gradually topped up. So it's a really interesting time at the moment for the helium market. We see a lot of similarities actually between the helium market and the uranium market in terms of supply and demand. It's a very there are a lot of links there, and yeah, that's the basis of our focus, really, to build up large scale supplies totally disassociated from oil and gas.
What do you see as some of the key factors that differentiate Hotspur Helium from some of the other companies within this space?
Scale, really. We're looking at 5 BCF prospects across our acreage. We're expecting to find about 10 viable prospects, and we're going to choose the top 3 for taking through to exploration drilling. So already there, that's a huge amount of helium that can be coming onto the market. Compare that to some of the other players in North America or even others in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa. They're looking, on the whole, sort of under 1 BCF, 1 to 2 BCF, that sort of level. There's one in Southern Africa that has about 7 BCF. So that's significant, but we're going to be at least double that. So the difference between us and what other people have been doing is, particularly in North America, is that they've all been focusing on quite small pockets of helium, whereas because we're looking in places that no one has looked before, no one has specifically targeted these regions for helium exploration, even though all of the geology is fantastic for it. We're in a position where we can come in and we can find these really large prospects.
One of you can just outline where the company is in its actual journey and how you see it developing sort of over the next few years.
We're moving really quickly. So we achieved more in the first year than I really expected to achieve in 3, really, in terms of doing all of these country entries, moving into all of these new spaces. It's been a funny time because when you're first going into these countries, you can't really talk about it. You can't really go out there and say, oh, we're looking at helium in Botswana, because otherwise the world and the dog will be in. So we've had to be very careful with that. But the speed that we've been able to go through this and acquire these licenses has been really exciting. Every single country we've gone into, we've been welcomed with open arms. Botswana is a great example where they're pretty dependent on the diamond industry, and so someone like us coming in and saying, "Oh, we're actually really interested in exploring a different commodity for you," that goes down extremely well. Similarly, in Zambia, in Jordan, another great example of that, where compared to some of their neighbours, they don't have the same amount of oil and gas as the Saudi or Qatar or Iraq or other people like that. But they have a huge amount of data. They've conducted a lot of exploration. They've conducted a lot of drilling, a lot of seismic work, and we can make use of all of that data for our exploration work. And we're looking in different geological units to what people were looking before for oil shales or for gas reserves. So there's a huge opportunity there, which is what we're taking advantage of. Over the next year or so, we'll be doing all of our surface exploration work. We're just coming through our fundraise for that. We're just closing that off now. That's sort of on the order of between $6 and $12 million to do our surface exploration across our 20,000 square kilometers. After that, we'll be moving into a large exploration drilling campaign. Now, we've got a lot of experience in exploration drilling. We used to own a drilling rig in East Africa, 1,000 horsepower drill rig in East Africa. So we understand the ins and outs of drilling as well, and how these different regions where we're operating, how well suited they are to these large sort of drilling operations. So we'll be doing, as I said, we'll be choosing the top 10 prospects, and of those top 10, we'll be taking the top three through to exploration drilling. That will be based on the geological conditions. That would be based on the surface infrastructure conditions, access to market, those sorts of points that we'll have to consider for all of those prospects. And we hope to be drilling early 2028. Really, we want to have identified where those top three prospects are going to be by middle of 2027, and drilling by 2028, with an objective of getting that first helium online 2030. Let's say 2030, because it's entirely possible with helium because it's such a small molecule. You can flow, if you have a successful exploration well, you can put on your modular compression facility, which typically have pretty short lead time, 6 to 9 months, something like that. Once you've got your flow rates, you can be churning out some molecules very, very quickly.
And finally, what does the commercial picture look like in terms of off-takers, project economics and payback?
It's an extremely lucrative commodity. It's worth something like 200 times, between 200 to 300 times that of natural gas. And the volumes that you have to deal with are pretty small. A single truck of compressed helium can hold anywhere between 150 to 300,000 cubic feet of helium. Now, those are comparatively small numbers. You can be moving sort of one truck a day, and that's giving you a payback between sort of 1 to 2 years on your prospect. So you've got pretty much your standard hockey stick economics, like you would in oil and gas or in mining, but it's very, very quick, and you can do it with modular compression facilities. You can do it with centralized liquefaction plants, and you can be trucking your helium either from the Middle East case directly to end users in the Middle East and in Europe, or in the Southern Africa case, well, there was your oyster. You can go east, you can go west, and you can also satisfy local demand as well. So we're very, we're pretty bullish on that, actually, that the ability to supply will be there, and crucially, the way we're going about this is we want to be too big not to be noticed, really. The vast majority, sort of in the 90% of helium, is bought by the top 6 gas distributors. And if you've got 5 BCF prospects, that's our big selling point.
Tom, really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Obviously telling us about the Hotspur Helium and obviously the uses of helium, and actually explain to our audience a little bit about the helium market. And like you said, it's quite a small market. It's obviously very niche as well, but obviously critical in everyday life. That I suppose a lot of people may not necessarily associate helium with. I think most people associate helium with balloons, but obviously it's used far and wide in many applications. So thank you for sharing your story. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions and they want to follow the story and even find out more about helium, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
So you can contact us through our website, hotspurhelium.com. There's a contact page on there with an email address, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. Got a LinkedIn page, and there'll be more and more announcements over 2026 as we start developing these prospects out and start getting some good news stories.
Yeah. Well, all the best for 2026. And obviously those details will be in the show notes of companies. So, have a great year, and hopefully get some more prospects underway, and hopefully you can come on the podcast either later this year or next year and give us an update.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Rob.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Again, some more education around helium as a commodity, or if you call it a commodity, but it is used in everyday applications, as Tom has alluded to. So thank you for listening. Appreciate if you could share these episodes far and wide. I know a lot of you do. But yeah, please keep sharing the message and keep educating our industry, the mining industry, on the different and variety of different commodities and applications that are within our industry, and help educate the wider market. Thank you again, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.